Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this program for Commonwealth North. My name's Winetta Ayers. I'm the Executive Director for Commonwealth North. For more than 40 years, Commonwealth North has served as a nonpartisan forum to illuminate Alaska's critical issues. In pursuit of that mission, Commonwealth North provides study groups to examine those issues in depth and forums such as today's program to highlight policies and issues that impact our state. Commonwealth North is led by a 21-member board of directors who are dedicated to nonpartisan citizen engagement and public dialogue with Alaskan elected officials and thought leaders. With that, let me turn the floor over to Terry Smith, President of the Commonwealth North Board of Directors. Terry?
Thank you, Winetta. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Terry Smith. Currently, I serve as the CFO for Vitus Energy and am this year's president of the board. And I just want to thank you for joining us online and on the phones. We are all very interested in hearing our speaker get us up to date on what's going on in Washington. You can't open any paper. I was going to say paper, but nobody's reading papers, I don't think, these days. But bottom line is that you can't turn on a TV or on a video without hearing a news story coming out of Washington, D.C. Seems like, and they change by the minute. Today, we are honored to host U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski, who will speak to some of the more recent federal actions, legislation, and appropriations related to the Arctic that will more fully realize the U.S. position as an Arctic nation. Senator Murkowski is considered a leading expert in Congress on Arctic policy and polar affairs. Throughout her years in the Senate, Murkowski has continuously worked to raise awareness amongst her colleagues on Capitol Hill and across the U.S. that because of Alaska, the U.S. qualifies as an Arctic nation and consequently gives our nation a seat at the table for Arctic policy negotiations on a global stage. She is the chairman of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee and also serves on the Senate Appropriations Committee, where she is the chairman of the Interior and Environment Subcommittee. Before we hand the program over to the senator, I'd like to thank the Commonwealth North members who are online with us for your membership and the tremendous work you've done to help educate Alaskans, including our policy leaders, on Alaska's public policy challenges. I'd also like to invite the rest of you to join Commonwealth North and support our mission. Senator, I'll hand the program over to you, and then we can take questions after your remarks. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm doing my own technical setup here, and somehow or other my voice has gone froggy. So I'm in good shape, but I just have a rusty voice. I want to thank all those who have joined. I understand we've got a sellout crowd here this morning, but the opportunity to talk about, in my view, all things Arctic, whether it's federal actions, whether it's legislation, appropriations, but to really understand how the Arctic is being viewed in the Congress right now and in Washington, D.C. and in larger settings. Again, my thanks to Commonwealth North. As we're dealing with COVID and people are participating in different ways, I appreciate the chance and the opportunity to focus on an area that I think is not only significant but grows with significance with every day. And if I have any frustrations about the Arctic, it is that there are others who are kind of slow to come to the game. And so when we have a chance to gather together to talk about the developments, the challenges, the opportunities, this is a positive. So making sure that the Arctic is understood is one of my priorities. And I know that the focus that Commonwealth North has had on this has been significant, and you're making a difference in that as well. So to make sure that we've got time for questions later, I'm going to go through the prompts that I think when folks signed up to listen to my comments today, there were 6 different areas that we were going to be looking at, and I'm really just going to go through them in that order. The first was the reestablishment of the Arctic Energy Office, its role, and really what success might look like in that. This is, you kind of go back a little bit in time here in terms of the origins of the Arctic Energy Office. It was initially created, this was back in fiscal year 2001 in the National Defense Authorization Act. So this was actually before I came to the Senate, that there was language that was included within the NDAA to establish an Arctic Energy Office at the Department of Energy. So it was put into law, and effectively nothing really happened with it. So I've been pushing language for the past couple of years through the appropriations process to revive this and really make something of it. This office that we have breathed life in through the appropriations has as a core mission a focus on energy, science, and national security. It's a cross-cutting in terms of its mission and approach. We didn't locate it within a single existing program because really we didn't want it to just focus on one area at the exclusion of all others. So if you look to the appropriations language itself, it really does describe what the office will do. It says it will support a renewed focus on the Arctic and serve as a centralized area to support the use of energy resources, but also innovative activities, including microgrids and integrated energy systems. So my hope, and I guess how I would define the success of the office itself, is that we'd be looking to promote a range of innovative technologies. Again, whether it's microgrids, integrated energy systems, river and marine hydro. These are just some of the areas that I would expect and hope that they would focus on. And then the goal there, you focus on that, you move us in that direction, is really to see decreased energy costs in the state, increased efficiency, and also helping to improve security. So the office is just now finding its footing, but over time, I really do hope and anticipate that it will help us meet the needs of remote communities that are affected by the change in climate, by weather, extreme weather, but also strengthening the department's international engagements in the Arctic, because I think that that's also an important component of it. The office is located at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. They will report directly to the Undersecretary of Energy. There's 3 initial staff. One is a detailee from the department's Office of International Affairs. This is effectively a scientific office, so I think you should expect the bulk of its staff to be from academia and researchers in the energy community. As the office grows, we may see staffing levels change, but overall, I think that it is critical that it be run by people who understand the needs of remote communities like we have in Alaska. So that's the Arctic Energy Office. Moving to, before I move off of that though, I want to acknowledge just the work of the Cold Climate Housing Research Center there in Fairbanks. We know that Cold Climate Housing has struggled a little bit with funding issues recently, and with the state's fiscal issues. And for many of us who have long been strong supporters of cold climate housing, we were really worried about whether or not all the extraordinary efforts that have come out of CCHRC would disappear. The fabulous news this year has been this collaboration between cold climate housing and our national labs, specifically NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab. And so to be with Jack Hebert and Bruno and so many of the others that have really led that team, and to see this partnership come together, I think is a real example of extraordinary collaboration, and I'm pleased about the opportunity for great, strong partnerships. So moving to the next item on our list, which is Senate Bill 2786, the Arctic Shipping Federal Advisory Committee. This is legislation that I've been working on. We've included it in the Coast Guard bill. I'm also pushing to authorize funding to support its implementation. But for those of you who perhaps are not familiar with this legislation that I've introduced, and I've worked with many of you that are on this call, most notably Meade Treadwell. I've been working over the years to really help build this out. But what we're seeking to do is establish an advisory committee of federal officials, of Alaskans, of Arctic stakeholders that would effectively be tasked with developing a plan to enable the United States to address the increasing maritime traffic in the Arctic. And so as part of the job, the committee would specifically consider if a congressionally chartered Seaway Development Corporation, modeled after what we've seen on the St. Lawrence Seaway and the St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation that they have there, how we can enhance the leadership role that's played by the United States in improving the safety and reliability of Arctic maritime transportation. So this is, I think, we recognize a critical challenge, and increasingly an issue as we see the volume of shipping increase in the Arctic. We know full well we have a lack of adequate infrastructure to support safe maritime commerce, and this includes everything from port facilities, from ice breaking capacity to oil spill response capabilities. So what we would hope from this advisory committee would be a path forward to really enable the U.S. to responsibly navigate the increased shipping within our waters, but also working with and helping to safeguard the interests of our coastal communities, the tribes, subsistence users. So this is legislation, again, that we have been reaching out to many stakeholders, many groups, gaining your input. It's now, again, trying to advance through the Coast Guard bill, and we're hopeful to see progress on that yet this year. So moving to appropriations, because we have seen through different authorizations, most notably through the NDAA, some real forward movement in this area as it relates to Arctic. And I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Dan Sullivan. Dan serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and in that role has been very active in shaping the NDAA this year, and worked very hard and very aggressively to make sure that many of the Arctic priorities that we both have been working on have been part of that authorization bill. So this is where you see real teamwork, is when you have somebody who's working the authorization side, like Dan is through NDAA, and then I, in my role on appropriations and defense approach specifically, can come in and move those appropriations. So again, within NDAA, we've got a litany of provisions that support Arctic and Alaskan initiatives. One that I have helped to really advance, and again, with the support of many folks, and I appreciate Commonwealth's interest in this. Senator Sullivan and I introduced legislation last year that would establish the Ted Stevens Center for Arctic Security Studies. So this effectively is a new regional Department of Defense center. It would be the first regional center in the Arctic, the first new DoD center since 2000. But I think it's important to recognize, and this is something that we've generated a lot of interest in our proposal because of this. The polar region is the one region of the globe that where the United States and Department of Defense does not have kind of oversight or jurisdiction, if you will, with a defense studies center. So, in my view, this is overdue and an important priority. The way we've laid this out, the center would be located in Alaska. It would support defense strategy objectives and policy priorities through this academic forum, but also working to foster strong international networks of security leaders. As I mentioned, we have a version of the Stevens Center in both the House and the Senate NDAA. So this is good, because right now going through conference, so I would certainly expect it to survive the conference process, and after that we'll work towards appropriations. So we've had good support from DoD leaders. We appreciate that, and the support of others. Other things within NDAA, we have a strategic Arctic port construction plan, which authorizes the construction of a strategic Arctic port, so that we can work to meet the requirements of national security needs, and really so much more. It is a port for the region that means so much from a strategic perspective, but also so much to those who live in the region. So the update on that, the Army Corps has issued its chief's report, so they've approved the plan for the Deepwater port there in Nome. The next step for us in Congress is to push that through. But again, I mentioned that the Senate NDAA has a strategic Arctic port construction plan, and that plan, what we're seeking to do is not just one deep water port, it is a series of deep water ports. So we're just getting started here. Other things within NDAA is a thawing permafrost impact study focused on examining the impacts of a warming climate that are creating changes in the Arctic. We're seeing that with thawing permafrost and having impact on critical infrastructure that is important to national defense. So this has been targeted or highlighted, and I think it's important that the federal government pay more attention to our rapidly changing environment and the impacts that it has on infrastructure and, again, on national security. Arctic communications, also extraordinarily key and an important provision to not only be focused on in NDAA. I think it's important to note that the Air Force Arctic strategy that came out not too many months ago placed a high priority on Arctic comms. So this is going to be important as we work to build out more robust communications in the Arctic and support an initial satellite capability for the region. And then lastly, within NDAA is encouragement that the Department of Defense improve collaboration in the Arctic. And this, again, includes communication efforts among the federal agencies and working to address some of the issues, some of the matters related to the emerging power struggle in the region, but focusing again on these communication, creating an interagency task force there. So collaboration is what we seek at a host of different levels. And I think it's important that that is included as part of the NDAA as well. I will note that NDAA is still going through the process, but we've already seen some action from the administration, executive action. Jim DeHart has been named the coordinator for the Arctic region. And then one more initiative that is moving through the process that has impact on the Arctic is the WRDA bill. America's Water Infrastructure Act, we know it as WRDA, but it has some significant provisions for the Arctic as well. It includes deep draft port in Nome, dredging in Unalaska, a navigation project in St. George. It also calls for increased coastal mapping. We continue that push out, invasive species prevention, reduction, and eradication, as well as coastal vulnerability assessments. So again, all have implications for the Arctic there. I'm getting close to the end here, but we can't have a conversation about what is happening in the Arctic without an update on icebreakers and our polar security cutters. In June, the Trump administration issued a presidential memorandum on safeguarding U.S. national interests in the Arctic and Antarctic regions. That was important for the discussion on, again, infrastructure, most notably polar security cutters. We saw in mid-September the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Healy suffered a major fire, so she's out of commission for some time before she's going to be able to return to the sea. So this just, again, is just an in-your-face reminder of why we need to have a fleet of icebreakers, not just one icebreaker or a very aging icebreaker. So to have the polar security cutters, it has got to be key to any part of our strategy. As you know, we've begun the funding of one polar security cutter. We're working towards the funding for 3 more. And again, that effort is one where we're not just talking about the need for an icebreaking fleet. We're moving out on it. We are in construction with more funding lining up for the follow-ons. Another topic mentioned in the notes for this event is adding and amplifying Alaskan voices in Arctic policy making. This has got to be a given. We have to have Alaskans actively engaged and working on Arctic issues. We won't see our state's needs and interests represented in the decisions that are being made if there's not this amplification of our voices. So as a starting point on this, I just would start with our delegation, because I think that our Arctic issues are well represented in the delegation between me and Dan and Don and members of our staff. But that's only one branch, and we're certainly outnumbered within it. I have introduced legislation that would help to build things out more permanently, institutionalize, if you will, in the executive branch. I've introduced legislation that we call the Arctic Policy Act of 2019. We're already a year behind here, but it would effectively make permanent high-level forums in the executive branch, like the Arctic Executive Steering Committee. It would enable Arctic communities to have a greater voice in the development of Arctic policy. And I think it's important, again, that we have these institutional forums, but I also recognize that we hear a lot in DC anyway that people are policy. And so I want to reinforce a couple things here. First, we have to push for the creation of the right positions in the relevant agencies that will be shaping Arctic policy. And second point is that we're going to have to work with whoever is president, Republican, Democrat, whatever the future might hold. But we need to work with them to place Alaskans in those positions, which means we have to have our farm team here. We have to have a group of people from Alaska who know and understand the Arctic like we do. We need a group of people that are willing to serve when called upon, who don't have a steep learning curve to overcome before they can become really effective. You know, I think we saw with Assistant Secretary Tara Sweeney the value of having that strong Alaskan in that position at the Department of Interior, and what she was able to bring to the conversation, not only nationally, but certainly a voice who knows and understands Arctic. And so the more that we are able to do that, it is so important. I was heartened to see the president's recent intent to nominate or to appoint Major General Randy Church to a position on the U.S. Arctic Research Commission. Church is a resident of Eagle River. He's been executive director of the Arctic Domain Awareness Center there at University of Alaska. I think he'd do a fine job, do a great job there. Last point that we want to hit before we go to questions, and this relates to international relations. Let's talk about Greenland. The reopening of the U.S. consulate there in Nuuk, I think was an important step, not only for our relationship with Greenland, but in demonstrating the United States' commitment to the Arctic region, to our partners there in the far north. I think we need to continue to have both a physical and a political presence in the region. And I had raised this as an issue that the United States needed to establish a consulate there in Greenland years ago, and I'm really pleased to see that we are now to that place. I think it is interesting to note, I was just reading in my news clips this morning that last week the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs approved Russia's request to create an honorary consul in Nuuk. Apparently the request had been made many months ago, but they have just signed off on that. And I think that that's further demonstration of the interest in Greenland, and again, making sure that the United States has a presence physically and politically, I think is important. In addition, though, to the national government efforts, I think it's also important to remember the efforts at the sub-national level in strengthening these regional ties. And you've got different forums that are out there, whether through the state of Alaska in the Northern Forum, the mayors throughout, many of our mayors participate in the Arctic Mayors Forum. But these are really good opportunities to share best practices and to develop these relationships, develop the trust that I think sometimes is just not possible given the political tensions at the national level. And we don't want to forget or underestimate the importance of that. I was able to participate just last week in a virtual forum, the Arctic Circle held in Reykjavik. It is something that many of you have been involved with, and it's usually this time of year that we travel to Reykjavik and gather to meet with thousands of individuals who are focused on the Arctic. It's always energizing. It's always important to not only participate in the official meetings, but the unofficial meetings, the sidebars, the hellos at the coffee break. These are great opportunities for cooperation and collaboration. And it has been a challenge this year because whether it's Arctic Circle and that forum being canceled, the the Arctic parliamentarians, on which I've been serving now since for 15 years, I guess. Some these events have been canceled, and we know that. And so the different ways that we can stay connected throughout COVID, I think, is going to be important. The final prompt that I had, again, was to focus on what can be done to promote more cooperation with our neighbors in Russia and Canada, Greenland and Iceland. And on that subject, and I was asked this question when I was participating in the Arctic Circle event last week, but I think that the Arctic Council has to remain a forum that focuses on matters other than security. But I also believe those discussions should continue, but we need a separate forum when we're talking about security discussions, and I reiterated that last week. But it could be, if people have asked, well, what should it be? It could be the Arctic Security Roundtable at the Munich Security Conference, or we could bring back the Arctic Chiefs of Defense Staff Conference. Again, I just think we need to have those discussions, but the Arctic Council, I think, has been able to do many of the cooperative, collaborative efforts, whether it's with oil spill prevention, search and rescue. It's been because we were able to focus on things other than defense. And again, I'll mention the role of the Arctic parliamentarians and their conferences, and all of the other areas of cooperation that really bring us together to continue to do good things in the Arctic. So again, I probably talked longer than most people had hoped or wanted, but I thank you all for the opportunity to share my views this morning, a little bit of an update, and again to thank Commonwealth North for their continued focus and prioritization of important Arctic and Alaskan policies. And with that, I'm happy to field any questions that folks might have on the call.
Great. Well, thank you, Senator. I'll be trying to wrangle the questions for you. Just as a reminder to our participants that you can submit questions through the Zoom chat window, or you can text questions to 907-230-2284. Again, that number is 907-230-2284. And I just will mention that brief questions will get more attention than very, very long ones. So please be brief in your questions. The first one, Senator, is what role do you see the Arctic Research Commission playing in the future?
The U.S. Arctic Research Commission, I think about their role. I don't recall exactly what year they were established. I do know that it was my father, Frank Murkowski, when he was in the Senate, that established the U.S. Arctic Research Commission. And so they have been functioning and focusing on all matters related to the Arctic for so many years, and providing such an incredible basis of knowledge and again, collaboration. So I view the U.S. Arctic Research Commission again as that body that is really focused on understanding all things Arctic, whether it's from an environmental perspective, whether it is from a health of indigenous peoples perspective, the focus on climate change and the impact, whether to food security or otherwise. Their mission set has always been pretty extensive and should remain that way. I want to make sure that the U.S. Arctic Research Commission is again viewed as that entity, that body that can serve as the resource for whether it's federal agencies or whether it is basis for dialogue with other nations. So as we work to build up other assets in the Arctic, for instance, our Ted Stevens Arctic Securities Center, or what we're doing to institutionalize in some of our at the executive level some of the policies. I view the U.S. Arctic Research Commission as helping to facilitate all of the increased and stepped up activity.
Great, thanks. The presidential memo in June identifying issues regarding safeguarding U.S. interests in the Arctic and Antarctic identified the need to identify at least 2 domestic and 2 international basing options. Those results were anticipated in August, and I don't know, maybe there's been a few distractions in the last few months, but can you speak to what locations would be what would be the potential locations for those bases and how you see the polar security cutters fitting into those options?
Well, I'm just kind of taking a sigh and a deep breath, because it's always seemed just a little bit incredible to me that we would have our icebreakers, our polar security cutters based or home ported in a place that was not close to the Arctic. And I know Alaska's history. We all know that whether it was the fishing industry or whether it was your healthcare or banking or whatever, everything was done out of Seattle, and we couldn't host much of anything here. Well, those days are long over, and the effort to ensure that we have polar security cutters within the polar region, rather than having to have them move up from Seattle, or right now, if the closest national security cutter that we have to Alaska right now is in Alameda, California, and so that's a lot of water that you've got to move through in order to get up into the Arctic. And so the effort to home port is one that I think we need to keep pushing on. This is something where Senator Sullivan has not been shy to lift his voice and express his feelings and views on this. And he reminds us, we need to be looking not to the situation as it is on the ground in Alaska or in the water right now. We need to be thinking long-term. We're talking about long-term strategies and policies. And so it is true that right now we don't have the facilities that could support the basing of a polar security cutter. We'd have to build it. Yes, we would, just as we're having to move forward with other Arctic infrastructure that we don't have yet. But we shouldn't let that hold us back from the reality that we've got to be prepared. We've got to be in the game. So yes, we need to be looking at Alaska's role in hosting and home porting and basing. I wish that I could tell you that I had an update in terms of the timing on that. I don't have anything new to report on that, but the attention is certainly has been raised.
Thank you. We do have a couple of questions coming in regarding polar cutters. Can you say a bit more about what the current status is with regard to the number of cutters authorized and those that are funded at this stage?
Right. So 6 have been authorized. 3 polar strength, 3 3 polar class, 3 smaller, have been authorized. And that was based on the naval study some years ago. So what has happened with the appropriations is we have appropriated the funding for the first polar security cutter. There was also funding to begin the second one, and now with this within this next round of appropriations, we will look to be doing more. So again, moving forward to build out 3. I think it is important to recognize just the current status of where we are with our polar, with icebreakers in general. I mentioned that that the medium strength Healy she's going to be out of the water for some time after this fire, and so we don't have anything in the Arctic right now. Haven't since mid-September, and don't have the ability to. The Polar Star hasn't been in Arctic waters in I don't know how many years, and she will not be in Arctic waters. Her responsibility is to cut through to Antarctica and to provide for the missions down there in Antarctica. It's estimated that her useful life is probably anywhere from 5 to 7 or 8 years, probably at best. She's already been rehabbed once. The polar sea is nothing left but bones there, and so that's not an opportunity. So our reality is we have nothing for the Arctic right now. This first one that will come off the line by 2024 is also destined for the Arctic to fulfill that, the Antarctic, to fulfill the commitment that we have to do the plow out to McMurdo. And so we still don't have our Arctic polar security cutter. And so that's why the effort to move forward with number 2 is going to be so key. But again, what we've learned, when you only have one in the water, like we do with the Healy, and something happens to it, you don't have a backup. You don't have a backup. And so that's why we're not just doing 1 and then waiting, and doing 2 and then waiting. We have to do all 3 so that we've got 1 for Antarctica, 1 for the Arctic, and 1 that has the flexibility in the case that that something happens, because it was Polar Star actually had a fire on board earlier in the season as well. So these are things that happen, and if you don't have spare capacity, you are exposed, and we've been exposed for a long time, and we know that.
Thank you, Senator. Let's move off of polar cutters and maritime issues for a moment and talk about communications in the Arctic. On November 4th, we're going to have a session with the Arctic Policy Study Group on communications, because of course there's a lot of attention and focus, and we'll be having representatives from local telecoms as well as some of the new players that are entering the Arctic. So can you talk a little bit about some of the emerging broadband solutions and other telecommunications that are opening up, as well as the auction for spectrum that's going to tribal entities in the Arctic?
Yeah, there's so much going on, and it's exciting because for a while it just seemed like we were struggling. But in fairness, we have seen some real significant advancements. I was on a Zoom call yesterday with the Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary Perdue, Dan Sullivan, and Don Young were also on the line, where the Secretary and the head of the USDA made an announcement about grant funding for GCI and Unicom to build out fiber to the Aleutian going out to Unalaska, a recognition again as to what that is going to bring. The interests that we have in satellites here in the north, everybody from SpaceX to OneWeb to so there's a host of others that are engaged at levels that I think are unprecedented and exciting in terms of our opportunities for coverage and access like we simply haven't had. I do think it's important. I mentioned the Air Force Arctic strategy with a very keen and directed focus on Arctic communications. I had a discussion with General Van Cleve. Oh, I think it's Van Cleve. He's I'm having a conversation with him in the morning at AFN as well, and I'm apologizing if I'm getting his name wrong. He's the new head of Northcom, and his emphasis that this is the key priority really right now is Arctic communications. And you think about it, it's like, okay, well, that's from the defense side, the security side, but what that brings then to the region in terms of those who live there, who are raising their families there, and all that will bring. So we are seeing I think a heightened level of engagement in Alaska, in the Arctic, when it comes to connection and communication, and the investments that we're seeing. Again, I think are pretty unprecedented. So there's a lot that is happening, and I think happening in a good way. We're all dealing with life with COVID right now, and if there's one thing that we have learned in terms of disparity, is that we have far too many places in rural America and in places like Alaska where we don't have the same advantages. And so everything that we can be doing to help address the inequity from access has gained a level of attention, and I think financial priority that is going to be very important going forward. I think about some of these kids in some of these smaller villages where they've had an outbreak of COVID, and the classrooms are shut down, and there is no way to access the internet. There is no way to have a virtual classroom because they don't have access, and so those kids are just going to be in a different place, in a different situation than other kids in America. So everything that we're doing to address it is critically important.
Indeed. Thanks, Senator. You spoke a little bit about the Arctic Council and relationships with Greenland. And we have a question here about what's your view of how collaboration with Russia and the U.S. can develop, given that there's rising geopolitical tensions in the Arctic, and what kind of cooperation and collaboration can we anticipate with Russia?
Well, and I think this is where organizations and relationships built through different venues and forums are so important. I mentioned that I've been on the Arctic Standing Committee on Arctic Parliamentarians for about 15 years. I've been the sole U.S. representative on that. I think I'm the longest serving Arctic parliamentarian now, as other members have rotated in and out. But what we have been able to bring to the table for discussion when we're talking about things like wildfires in the Arctic, or food security issues as they relate to our indigenous peoples. You can have a conversation with your Russian counterparts about something like Arctic wildfires or food security issues, and have not only meaningful engagement but sharing of best practices, all the while Washington D.C. and Moscow maybe just going at one another tooth and nail. And I think that it's important to recognize the role that again, whether it's Arctic parliamentarians or the role of Arctic Council, or I mentioned the Northern Forum. There's so many different venues where, again, you're establishing relationships with other Arctic nations, and you can come together on some shared goals and principles here, even while tensions can be pretty high politically. And I'll share a quick story. This was some years ago when the Arctic Council was meeting in Kiruna, Sweden. And John Kerry was our Secretary of State, and Lavrov was the foreign minister there in Russia. And we had the news had just broken about, I believe it was I don't remember whether it was a Russian journalist. Anyway, it was explosive news at the time, and everyone was quite nervous as to what the response was going to be at the Arctic Council. But that was where they signed the Declaration on oil spill prevention, I believe, and you had the two heads of state side by side, committed to working together on a matter that was important. They didn't talk about, or I assume they didn't talk about what the current news of the day was, but I think it was important. It's certainly important to me as a visual reminder that when we have opportunities to be working together on some of these matters, some of the politics that is very much at play, is very relevant, we can still try to work together. And having said all this, I also know that several years back at an Arctic parliamentarian meeting that we had in Canada, the Canadians didn't want the Russians to come, and it was tense. So we work through these as well. You cannot ignore the political tensions, but I think there are good reasons to still try to maintain some level of relationship.
Thank you. I've got a couple of quick questions on energy, and we'll try and end on time. But this morning we heard with the Arctic Policy Study Group from Launch Alaska, as well as some representatives from the Northwest Arctic Borough, about their efforts to combine solar with wind, with upgrading diesel generation capacity, doing basically all things are on the table efforts to combine technologies and move Arctic communities forward. With regard to the Arctic Energy Office and the renewable energy resources that we have in Arctic Alaska, but most of them are geographically remote from any kind of developed infrastructure. Are you aware of any federal programs or other incentives to help close the gap on that?
On funding for energy
Connectivity of various energy projects across the Arctic.
Yeah, one of the things that that we would like to help facilitate is to have state energy programs be able to tap into the energy loan programs through DOE. I think we recognize that our big challenge is it's not a shortage of ideas. It's not a shortage of assets, if you will. We've got the wind, we've got solar, we've got geothermal, we've got marine hydrokinetic. We've got that resources, but for so many of these communities that we look to serve, they're small populations, and these systems, we might call them microgrids, but there's nothing micro about the cost. We understand how expensive it is, and so how we can help to facilitate it. And again, whether it's through what we're trying to do with the Arctic Energy Office, the Office of Indian Energy, again, is another opportunity. What we might be able to do, again, through DOE and the loan programs, working with state energy entities. These are all things that we look to try to help make this connect, because otherwise the good ideas continue to sit on the table and don't translate to the reduced energy costs. And one of the things that I pointed out, the partnership, the collaboration that we have with Cold Climate Housing and NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, I think it is important to note that Alaska is being viewed more and more as kind of a proving ground. You look at what is happening out in Igiugig with the RivGen system. This is OPCRs out of Maine. This is their technology, but what they've been able to demonstrate in Igiugig is really pretty exciting. And so they're looking to how can we be utilizing our technologies and working with communities. They're looking now at a project in Falls Pass, but again, we've got extraordinary river resources, tidal resources, and so they are, as a private company, are looking to Alaska as, okay, there's an opportunity to try to do some of these things. So what they can bring from the private side, again, and working with outside investors and partners is going to be key.
Great. Let me ask you this one final question. Many of some of the largest energy players in the world are talking about decarbonization and other strategies such as carbon sequestration. With regard to Alaska's North Slope, are you or any other policymakers pursuing any kinds of ideas about making the production fields in the North Slope an area for carbon sequestration once they become depleted?
Well, we talk about carbon sequestration, CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, sequestration. We started to use the term carbon management more than just sequestration, because when you think about it, sequestering, we put it in the ground, we lock it in the ground. The idea that you can take the carbon, that waste product, and actually create something of value. You don't necessarily create anything of value when you put it in the ground. Now you do if you're re-injecting to get your pressures up, get more oil out. Yes, that absolutely is. But if you're just looking to store it in the ground, that's one thing. But the carbon carbon management is something that I think it's interesting. We're still very much in the experimentation and the understanding it phase. I took a delegation of senators on a pretty significant Arctic tour, and one of our visits, oddly enough, was Aberdeen, Scotland. Aberdeen, the university there is very keenly focused on what is going on with CCUS and carbon management, and literally taking the stream of carbon off of the oil fields that are offshore in the North Sea there, and turning that into a resource. Everything from I don't want to call them cinder blocks. They look like cinder blocks, but they're construction blocks that just compressed carbon into building materials. What they're doing there with the level of innovation is really quite exciting. But in fairness to Alaska and our industry up north, I think we recognize that we're going to be dealing with efforts to meaningfully reduce emissions in this country and around the world. And we can have debates about climate change, and we can have debates about one policy or another. Is it a Green New Deal? Is it a carbon tax? Is it nothing at all? We can have debates about that, but I think that the push will be going forward that we're going to be working to reduce our level of emissions. And in Alaska, I think it's important that we do our share as well. We actually are better when it comes to the emissions from our oil fields, because we don't do the flaring like you see in the lower 48. So that does put us to advantage. But I think we need to be looking very critically at how we can work to reduce our emissions. You know, one of the things that I have been trying to advance the discussion on is Alaska's role when it comes to SMR, small modular reactors, nuclear. And people are like, wait, you can't go nuclear on us in Alaska. We're oil, we're gas, we're renewables, but nuclear, that just doesn't fit. But when you think about a mining project, for instance, out in the middle of Alaska, and no access to any grid at all. They've got to power themselves, and so you've got an expensive diesel generated operation, which is expensive, and you've got emissions that we're going to have to deal with. And so why not look at how a small modular reactor could work out in the field like that? And so I think that could have application up on the North Slope as well. One of the big challenges that we have up there is, believe it or not, water. Well, if you can't get the fresh water from the ponds that you need, we have a whole ocean up there, but we might need to work with desalination. Well, that also is an energy intensive project. And so can you look to advance to small modular to help with a desal project like that? I think these are the types of things that we need to be thinking about, because we have to be part of this conversation globally about how we work to reduce our emissions. And as we continue to produce a resource that the country and the world needs and is going to need for a long period of time, everything that we can do to make that production cleaner and more efficient and more affordable is going to be putting us ahead. We need to stay competitive. It's as simple as that.
Well, and we heard from Launch Alaska with their last cohort and had the organization Aquos that does small nuclear reactors, small modular nuclear reactors, and they're looking for a market here in Alaska, and hopefully I think they were close last time we checked on signing a deal here in Alaska. So hopefully that will happen. You know, I lied to you, Senator. I'm going to ask you one more question. Your chairmanship of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee will soon come to a close. And I'm just wondering if you could reflect on what do you feel was the most important accomplishment during your chairmanship, and what one thing that you hope in your handoff to the next chairman that they will pick up and carry on.
Well, I really appreciate the question. And I know everyone thinks it's like, oh, she's going to say it was opening ANWR, it was the Energy Act, the Energy Bill. Legislation is really important, and key pieces of it are significant as we move forward. But I'll tell you, I think the thing that I'm most proud of with the Energy and Natural Resources Committee that I have been privileged to chair for 6 years and to be the ranking member for 6 years, we have developed a reputation as being a committee that takes up hard issues and not only is able to advance bipartisan legislation, but we are able to do so in a way that allows for good, honest debate in a good, open committee process. And we work through the problems and the issues so that when we are able to move a bill out of committee to the floor, we have secured typically the support of well over 3/4 of the Senate, because we work in such a collaborative way. And that's not something that, in my view, you're seeing enough anymore. And because you're not seeing the bipartisan cooperative efforts in the committees, by the time legislation comes to the floor, it's lined up on a party line basis far too often. And when that happens, you're not necessarily building enduring policy. You're putting forth policy that might last through the tenure of this particular majority or that particular president. And so that's been really important to me, to know that I led a group of senators in a way that built consensus and hopefully built some enduring energy policy. So that's what I'm most proud of.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for your time. We've gone a little bit over. I do apologize. I'm going to hand it off to Terry Smith in just a moment for some final words. But I just wanted to remind all of our viewers today that we will provide a recording of today's session on our website, and we'll send out notices about that. And I wanted to remind you that next week at this time at noon on Wednesday, we'll have another session on ballot measure 1, the oil tax initiative. And so please join us for that. We'll be featuring Robin Brenna with Alaska's Fair Share and Roger Marks with Roger Marks Economics speaking in opposition to the measure. So please plan on joining us for that session as well. And also, as a save the date reminder, for November 12th, we will be presenting the Hickel and Egan Awards. This year's honorees are the late Jacob Adams, Oliver Levitt, and then receiving the William A. Egan Award will be Tara Sweeney. So we invite everyone to participate in that event as well. More information is available on our site, and will be forthcoming on some of the other details. So please plan on joining us for those events. And let me now hand it off to Terry Smith for some final words. Terry?
Very good. Thank you. I want to thank again Senator Murkowski for joining us today and for her presentation. She also reinforced on a number of occasions the value of Commonwealth North and the work that we do to help foster that open, honest, and respectful dialogue to keep those discussions going. And that's good for our community and good for our relationships as we become more global out of Alaska. Thank you all for joining us today. I encourage you to become a member of Commonwealth North if you're not already. And with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.